Hello again everyone and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John and as always thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. Zookeepers of Reddit. What's the craziest thing that happened at the zoo or during after hours? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Old arthritic tiger dies of old age. New young strong male tiger arrives from another zoo and after a few days of settling into his den area, the keepers let him out into the tiger exhibit, which was the kind surrounded by high fake rock walls. They had assumed it was tiger-proof because the old tiger had never got out. You see where this is going. So keepers are standing around watching, some up on the wall. Everyone's curious to see how the new tiger likes his new digs. He walks out, looks around, jumps, kinda scrambles straight up vertically, and whoop. He levitates up over the wall, and now he's standing there completely free, staring at the zookeepers. Catkeeper sternly says, "No." Tiger gives him this startled look like, "Oh, sorry, didn't realize." Hops back down into the exhibit, trots inside his den area, and somebody had the wits to close the door. Everybody looks at each other. Let's modify the exhibit a bit. Yeah, let's. I guess it's a testament to how well my zoo was run, but the craziest thing that happened at a zoo I interned at involved the seals. At night, we let the seals and sea lions have access to their indoor and outdoor pools, but in the morning the two seals would be inside with the door shut and the sea lions would be locked outside. After a week of this, we put up a camera and found one of the seals was shutting the sliding door for some alone time with the female seal. We got a hook to keep the door open, and the problem was solved. I used to intern at a zoo in Alabama. Once a zookeeper let her guard down around one of the older lions while cleaning her cage by not securely latching the gate that divides her cage in two. Lion opened the gate and jumped her. Thankfully, due to her older age, she didn't have many of her teeth left, and the keeper survived, albeit with nasty injuries. The lion thankfully wasn't put down, but the keeper was let go. In my city, there was an orangutan who'd refused to go inside on New Year's Eve because she wanted to watch the midnight fireworks. I wasn't a zookeeper, but I did work at a zoo for a while. Among other crazy stuff, one night the electronic locks failed on the baboon enclosure and the doors opened by themselves, so the baboons wandered out and then 15 or so of them. The head vet was working late and looked out her window to see, to her shock and surprise, a baboon walk past. She called the primate keepers in, and they spent the entire night luring the baboons back with their favorite treat, bananas, only just getting them all back in about a half hour before the zoo was due to open. Another story, one day, the binturong, kind of like a cross between a bear and a cat, escaped the zoo walls and climbed a tree in the park outside. The cops were called and were ready to shoot the poor bastard because they didn't know what it was and thought it was dangerous until the keeper arrived, picked the binturong up, and took him back to his cage. Former aquarist intern here. Our boss left the Phillip valve, the one that adds more water to the exhibit, open overnight on a 90,000-gallon Indo-Pacific tank, flooded over all night long, and somehow no one noticed until the morning. We lost a ton of fish due to the sudden salinity change. It even flooded the tapir exhibit next door. The tapir didn't seem to mind though, and spent the whole next day rolling around in smelly fish tank mud. A bit long, but it ends with drunk idiots almost getting eaten. This did not happen to me, but I heard about it the next day. So it's not uncommon for companies to have retreats and conferences at the big hotel belonging to the zoo, and they have the opportunity to see the animals at night. So my then co-worker, a small but extremely intimidating woman, and another female co-worker had the job of taking a group on an evening tour. First of all, they had been drinking a lot, so much so that about 5 of them were not allowed to even come with them. The rest of them were unruly and obnoxious, all middle-aged men in suits who were very rude to the little girls. Anyway, they come to the tiger exhibit. It's built into a large hill or cliff, and you stand on this big bridge looking out over it. No real fence, just the bridge wall that's like chest high, with these crenellations so kids can see. Anyway, the women are talking about the tigers, and two dudes are clearly not listening. The group leaves, and the women decide to count them. Surprise, two are missing. They hurry back and see the two men about to jump into the exhibit. I mean, you won't die from the fall, but you will absolutely break a leg or two. And, 4 tigers are in there. My coworkers manage to run up and grab the idiots and pull them down from the wall. They get pissed, and one of them literally says, "If little girls like you can play with them, I'm sure 2 men like us can handle them." They're not pets. Once and for all, animals in zoos are not tamed. You can't just cuddle with the tigers. Not one person that works there can cuddle with the tigers. Anyway, the tour was ended, security and later cops were called. The company is banned, and my coworker wanted to murder someone the next day. I quote, "I almost wish we hadn't made it in time, but think of the paperwork." I don't know if it's a morbid curiosity or just the obnoxiousness of people, but I don't know what would compel anyone to want to jump into an enclosure with a tiger or a lion. I don't know, crazy. I never worked as a zookeeper, but I've trained as one and had multiple internships at a zoo. We were told so many stories by the zookeepers. The most interesting thing that I got to be a part of was when 2 of the tigers were being neutered. One was male, so it was done on site in one of the cages. The female we had to take down to the clinic. It was funny seeing the visitors turning and looking as we drove the sleeping tiger through the park. The best part was listening to the vet as he was doing the procedure. He had a bit of a problem finding the second ovary and complained that there was too much fat in the way. He's a pretty cool dude. He retired around the time I finished my last internship there. In the safari park, they once found a car parked and the people missing. After some searching, they found a German family having a picnic. Luckily, they choose to do this in the first enclosure, which contained mooses, deer, and European bison, and not the ones with predators, but it's still dangerous. A pissed off moose is not something you want to be around. I was there once as a kid, and a car had broken down in the African savanna part of the safari park, and an ostrich was helping by pecking at the engine. A classmate of mine got a summer job working the gates between the enclosures, and a lady stepped out between the wolf, bear, and the lion enclosure. It almost gave my classmates a heart attack, and she had to shout to the lady to get back in the car. Someone tried to give their kid a pee break in the lion enclosure once. Luckily, a zookeeper passed by and told them to get back in their car. On a more serious note, there was once a man from Germany that stepped out of his car in the lion enclosure and tried to take a lion cub. The zookeepers had to use their cars to chase the lions off the block so they could get him. He didn't survive. I'm really glad they stopped having cars going through the safari park. Now there's a cable car line going through instead. There was also a wolf incident a couple of years ago where a zookeeper was killed. It was very hard for a lot of people I know. One of our teachers, who knew the zookeeper quite well, was pestered by the press for a while. Didn't happen to me personally, but the place I used to work for had a sloth that would climb out of his enclosure after hours. They'd find him on the floor just sitting there and would have to put him back the next morning. This happened many times before they realized how he was getting out. They readjusted his enclosure accordingly and he stopped getting out. Not a zookeeper, but used to do wildlife rehab if that helps. Skunks don't like to spray, but they will if they need to. So we were trained in how to handle and deal with them as to not set them off. Resultingly, direct sprays were incredibly rare for us, luckily, though they'd sometimes get a towel or something, and the scent was naturally carried, much diluted in their poo. One day, we finally got a spray. The handler did everything right, but as she was withdrawing from the cage to lock it, boom, all over the back wall. Now we were sort of a low-end establishment run out of a basement, and while we were clean and took good care of the animals, we were lacking in good ventilation. It wasn't bad in mild weather when we could open things up and intake was low in the winter, but in the summer, we tried to keep the windows closed because of AC. So when the skunk set off, he had a captive audience. So there we were with fresh skunk spray, which smells bad enough, right? I mean, a full dose in an enclosed, poorly ventilated area is like a brick to the sinuses. But this was no normal skunk. No, this skunk was sick. You know how when you get sick, your pee or poo can smell off or funky? Yeah, this guy was really sick. Regular skunk smell was no big deal in comparison. This was like a fleet of skunks had pissed in a pile of old tires, then the tires were set on fire. And then, when they were stinky, skunky bits the skunks pissed off on them again, let them in a hot car for 3 weeks, and then set them on fire one more time. We had to evacuate. Volunteers were herking in the driveway. We managed to fling the garage and entrance doors open, but that was the only external venting we had. The yard reeked of it. People had to leave. We finally got in long enough to point fans, turn off some stuff, check on other animals who didn't seem bothered, all the while doing fast dashes and holding our breath. I asked the director if she had any Vicks, and she thought I was crazy, until I reminded her that scene in Silence of the Lambs where they used it to help mask the smell of a rotting corpse. She got some, and after more airing out, we smeared it on our upper lips, so sexy, and those of us left were finally able to get back in. It took a while to get the scent all the way out, but luckily it was still workable before long, but it lingered. The kicker? The director lived upstairs. She had to live with it until it faded. TL, DR. Skunk spray stinks. Spray from infected ones stinks more, and it really sucks when it's in a poorly ventilated basement in the summer. Hurling was had. Volunteered at a zoo while I was in my teens. The okapi enclosure was right next to the hippos. One morning they found the baby okapi with her head inside the mouth of a hippo. There's a thicker fence between them now. People love to get as close as possible to the animals, sometimes stupidly close. The worst was someone poking their fingers into the jaguar's cage. They were very lucky that it was the old lazy male and not the high-strung female. One of the mountain lions was obsessed with strollers and would stalk people pushing them from his enclosure. This was over a decade ago, so that's all I remember. So we have a raven at our zoo. Ravens are very, very smart, but temperamental. She's trained to do certain commands for food, and one of them is pet. She will lower her head and let you stroke her for a few minutes, then she gets a treat. Generally our staff, and all zoo staff really, are very competent and common sense based. And even in this case, the lady was more than capable of caring for the animals, but just loved them a little too much. Co-worker comes in and greets the raven and asks to pet. Pets the raven and coos to her, then turns away to start cleaning. Well, Raven was not pleased, and after realizing what happened, jumps onto the co-worker's back and rips a huge hunk of her scalp off. The same raven was removed from the exhibit after throwing rocks at the neighboring animals and luring wild birds into her enclosure and torturing them to death in front of visitors. Not too crazy, but we always brought the lions into their house at night. One night, we found a lioness had climbed one of the trees by the perimeter and a bunch of us couldn't go home until she decided to come down. Ugh. The animals weren't too bad, really. It was the visitors that sucked. Had everything from a guy getting his kid out to pee in the baboon section, a guy trying to challenge a very bad-tempered rhino who was already miserable with hay fever, someone who fed a Mars bar to a meerkat, and a family who nearly handed their infant to a lion. Worked at a major aquarium for 5 years now. People are hands down the worst animals at the aquariums. I have so many stories, but here are just a few. We would have after-hours sleepovers, and we would constantly have to break up and call security on parents that we caught having sex under the shark tank. It was multiple times that this happened, which blows my mind. And there were kids sleeping like right next to the parents. I honestly think that some of these people have some pretty weird shark fetish. Divers would constantly find coins thrown into open exhibits in the gravel, and one time a dolphin ate one and needed emergency surgery. A group of girls once dared one of their friends to jump into the lion or dolphin exhibit, which she did. She ended up with a lifetime ban. They went easy on her. You'll be arrested if you attempt to go into an exhibit. Some of these animals are extremely delicate and rare. It's not taken lightly. A baby dropped her pacifier in the stingray exhibit, and the parents demanded that we give the pacifier back. But It easily could have had stingray shit on it, and we had to dispose of it. It was seriously one of those $1 pacifiers. A kid was leaning over a touch pool and proceeded to projectile vomit into it. We had to get a bucket and attempt to scoop it out, and then we just let it run through the filters. The sharks have really rough sex. Like, they bite each other when they mate, and people would constantly freak out and think they were eating each other. No, they're just effing. Honestly, there hasn't been any animal escapes or anything crazy happening with the animals. All of my stories seem to be weird shit that the public has done. Perth Zoo in Western Australia has had a very successful captive breeding program for Samaritan orangutans for a long time, and has had a decent-sized orangutan group for a long time. The breeding program has worked so well that it's the only zoo that releases orangutans back into the wild. I think the success of the breeding program was an inadvertent accident. In the 1960s, the zoo built a big bell tower-shaped cage for its male orangutan with a platform right up to the top where the male orangutan would stay. It was just a happy coincidence that he was a magnificent, super sexy orangutan that no female could resist, and he fathered about 20 babies over the journey of that orangutan's like to be, and been many escapes from enclosures over the years. The smartest one was an orangutan that watched the tradesmen building upright structures, and at night, by just using the strength in his hands, pulled out the screws and bolts in his jungle gym and rearranged it and the ropes so that he could swing across the moat and out of his enclosure. The pig escaped and went on an adventure. The donkeys I used to ride for work went berserk. Horses and donkeys can't stand pigs, LMAO. Also, we have a gibbon that likes pulling ponytails, so keepers with long hair have to keep theirs back to the fence. On a sadder note, an evil emu ran into a fence during a thunderstorm and died. This one is about my stupidity. We were on vacation in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and went to the little zoo there. My wife is extremely phobic of snakes, bad experience with a copperhead when she was 5, so she's always a little skittish at zoos. We were walking along and saw what appeared to be a very large albino python curled up on the ground in the middle of an open area. She freaked out, of course. I assured her that there was no way they would just leave a big snake like that unattended on the grounds. It had to be a fake. To prove it, I walked up and prodded it with my foot. As soon as my foot touched it, I knew I was wrong. It was a live albino python, and it looked right at me. I backpedaled as I touched it, as fast as I could, and apologized to my wife and kids for being an idiot. A zoo employee came up and asked what I thought I was doing. I gave some lame answer and asked him what the hell a snake was doing loose on the grounds. He gave some lame answer and went to wrangle it back into its cage.